Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Today's talk is called Accessibility, the Future and You. Why is that the case? Interact in its origin is all about the future of design. And I strongly feel that the future of design definitely needs to be accessible. Instead of me having to look backwards, I think I'm slightly waiting on a mirroring situation. Yes, thank you. Cool. Accessibility, the future and you. On the screen, we're seeing a gentleman in a wheelchair. He's wearing a VR headset, and his hands are up. He's clearly immersed in some experience. We'll get back to that later on in the presentation. But I wanted to quickly summarize what we're covering today. So we're talking about accessibility and what it is. I'll do a quick introduction on what accessibility entails. We'll run some statistics and identify key barriers, talk about the history of accessibility. Then we're talking about what does the current day of accessibility entail and what does the future entail. And then how can you become a part of it? Right, first, what is accessibility? So with accessibility, at Nomensa, we define that as ensuring someone isn't blocked from completing a task or achieving a goal as a result of experiencing disability. And the reason why I've highlighted experiencing disability is because this is about a social model surrounding accessibility. So if we first look at what accessibility is defined as in the Equality Act, we get to a very medical, very methodical definition. It says physical or mental impairment with substantial and long-term negative effects on daily activities. That is very much focusing on what disability that person has by a definition. Whereas definition to us, or a disability to us, is not about a person's health condition, but it's about a mismatch in human interaction. It's about them enabling them to fully participate in society, regardless of that disability. So who does that entail then? If we're looking at the brilliant document by Microsoft on inclusive design, we can see various areas where people might be either permanently, temporarily, or situationally impaired. Giving an example of touch, for example, someone could have lost an arm in an accident. They could have broken that arm and still be disabled temporarily, or they could be a new parent and holding a baby and still only having access to one hand. So we're reaching about various areas here in terms of types of disabilities, but one very big one is still missing on that list, and that's cognitive accessibility. That's people with dyslexia, people with ADHD, people with autism, things like that. It's a really large group. There's statistics on it, but there's also a lot of people that haven't gotten a formal diagnosis yet, which we still need to account for. So thinking about all those groups, then why should we be implementing accessibility? First of all, we can clearly agree together that helping everyone is just the right thing to do, but that's definitely not always enough to convince a senior stakeholder to go ahead and invest in accessibility. So what kind of other arguments could we make to drive accessibility forward? So better UX is there. Simon, who's at the back last year, pointed an example out to me. It's like you could create two designs that look identical, but if one was designed with accessibility in mind in terms of not only the design but also the actual integration, then you could argue that the accessible design will be the better design because it will be usable by more people. Accessible design by default is mobile friendly. One of the reasons for that is because the criteria for accessibility require your ability to basically zoom in to a certain percentage. And one of the best ways of achieving that is with responsive design and creating a mobile-friendly website. It's good for search engine optimization because a bot, like Google is just a blind bot with like 1 billion friends. It should be able to crawl your website, but it needs data structure to be able to comprehend how that works. And the same goes for someone using a screen reader. They need a proper heading structure to be able to get a mental map going of how your content is structured. One of the things I want to point out is we're starting to get an aging IT-savvy population. And I'll get to that in some later statistics in the next couple of slides. In the end, it also means like more people on your website that are able to, if you're selling a product, for example, are able to complete and you're able to convert them into a customer, it should increase your bottom line. Finally, the least favorite one is legal compliance. Accessibility is, and has for a long time been, a legal requirement already. So many countries have general laws around accessibility and or at least laws that cover discrimination and equal treatment of citizens. So accessibility is very much a part of that. And what we're seeing across the globe, both in the UK and in the EU and in America and other areas in the world, is like new, more substantial laws are being written to strengthen the position of people with a disability. Underneath a lot of that, for a global accessible coverage, so to speak, we have the United Nations Conventions on the Right of Persons with a Disability, which is ratified into law by currently 187 countries. And that sets a very broad baseline in terms of what their rights are for people with disability, including accessibility, both physical and digital. So wanted to talk to you a bit about statistics. So let's look at some numbers. In the UK, there's currently almost 68 million residents. More than 7.5 million of them live in the greater London area. The average population age currently is 40. There's 21.5 million people that are over 50. Why is that final figure important? So when we talk about people with a disability in the range of 60 to 65 years old, we're talking about 11 million people that identify as having a disability. So they're a key new audience for accessibility. These are the IT-savvy people I was talking about. These are the people that are my parents or your parents. They've grown up with the rise of technology, and they've been able to work and comprehend that. But now as they're getting of age, they might lose their vision or they might develop other impairments and they're no longer able to use tech that they've used before. So they're not familiar with accessibility. Accessibility has been around for quite a while, like about 45 years or so, in terms of basic laws, and then later on accessibility, like digital accessibility laws as well. But they're not familiar with that. General awareness around accessibility and building and making and designing products that are accessible is still very much a fresh field. We're seeing a lot of unawareness still in that space. So they're starting to experience those disabilities, but they can no longer use those tools, those websites, etc. So when we're talking about a disability, we're currently talking about 1 in 5 people. Then that figure stands pretty much globally. But it rises with age. So 45% of the population currently in the UK sits around the pension age. That means, applying some statistics to that, that's 5 million people within that group that have a disability. Once you get to people 80 and over, we're talking about almost 60% of that part of the population has a disability. And we're still forcing them, or forcing between quotes, we're still moving to a direction where things become more digital. Banking becomes digital, government becomes digital, shopping becomes digital. So they need to be able to use those services while 60% have a disability. Big numbers mean very little, at least to me in general. I have a hard time visualizing what 6 million people look like. So I picked Elmo because he does his 1s, 2s, 3s, and I really like Elmo. And I've broken it down to statistics for the people in the room. And these are statistics based on research in the UK. This room has about 220 people in there currently, which means that over the course of your life, 163 of you will either need glasses, lenses, eye correction surgery, getting their eyes lasered, you name it. They might develop a visual impairment of sorts. And that's anything from needing reading glasses to turning blind. 47 of you could have a disability, either visual or non-visual, in terms of like visual to the outside world. You could be deaf or hard of hearing, or low literate, would mean like 15% of you could sit in that range. 20 of you could be dyslexic. You could be colorblind. You could have one of the color deficiencies. For males, that is about 1 in 10, no, it's 5%. So currently 10 male and 1 female could potentially have a color deficiency. And then we get to blind or partial sightedness. That's a lot lower number, as you can see, than people needing just support with vision. And there's 3 people that could potentially be somewhere on the spectrum. And there's, on average, 1 person that relies on British Sign Language to communicate. So that makes, like, in general, we could pretty much say, over the course of your life, any one of us is going to develop a disability, whether that's permanent, temporarily, or situationally. But yeah, the chance of you not developing a disability over the course of your life is very slim. So as we can see, accessibility is very much about people. It's not about numbers, it's not about tech. It's about enablement for people to participate in society. So let's quickly look at some accessibility history, because I said like accessibility has been around for 45 years. So it basically started, like over the ages past, accessibility has always been of concern, of course. There's always been people that had a disability. That's nothing new, and how society handled those had very much its up and downs. But a big change was the '73 Rehabilitation Act that was initiated and basically defined human rights for people with a disability in the United States. Moving forward a couple of years, Jim Thatcher from IBM created the very first screen reader. Even though we didn't have any visual interfaces, we were still just working on a command prompt. The first screen reader was already being created. And then in 1990, the Americans with Disability Act came into play, focusing more, again, a US law, focusing more on providing people with a disability the support they needed, like the legal support they needed to come up for their rights. And yeah, that covers, basically, that initially covers like things like public areas for people, so shops and restaurants, things like that. And then in 1996, the Department of Justice declared that websites, which have popped up massively in those 5 years, 5-6 years, were also considered public accommodations, meaning they have to be accessible. And then in '98, Section 508 was amended for digital content. So Section 508 is part of the Rehabilitation Act, and it basically talks about accessibility for the wider US government. And digital content and web accessibility got entered into that. In 1999, there were a group of very smart and technical people that had found out all kinds of ways on how to make digital accessibility work. Like how can we make websites that we build accessible? They had come up with various success criteria, grouped them all together, and that's what was the first foundation of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as we know them today. And a couple of years later, Apple started integrating a screen reader into all of their devices. So the iPhone was, of course, one of the revelations of that moment. And it, by default, came with a screen reader. So it allowed even people with a visual impairment to start using cell phones and smartphones in that context. In 2008, WCAG 2.0 was released, and one of our co-founders, Mr. Alistair Campbell there in the room, has very much been involved in that creation and the creation of the guidelines since, but that introduced the POUR principle, so that's perceivable, operable, usable, and robust. And that's, it broadened the spectrum and made the guidelines more agnostic, and that very much became the technical standard for web accessibility for the almost 2 decades to come. Well, at least for the 10 years, because after 10 years we had an update, version 2.1, that basically expanded onto cognitive, speech, and magnification criteria, and helping support that. And cognitive has always been that iterative step. It's a relatively new but also very complex area within accessibility. There's a lot of variables. So coming up with success criteria that literally have a pass or fail state has been somewhat tricky. But last week we finally managed to get WCAG 2.2 released after a bit of struggles, but that again expands a bit into cognitive, low vision, and especially mobile devices and touch interactions, things like that, that were basically developed over those years, over the past 10, 15 years, but hadn't been integrated into the guidelines yet. So quickly looking at what has accessibility, all that accessibility history, what has that brought to us today? Some things we're all very much familiar with, I think. So we're seeing a little girl talking to a mobile speaker, could be, I'm not familiar with all of the brands, could be an Echo, could be Alexa. It's a device, you can talk to it, and it feeds back information. You can ask it a question, it searches the internet, and it gets you the top result. For people with a disability that might physically not be able to operate, something like Alexa, privacy concerns aside, was very, very helpful because they could literally talk to the speaker, drop in their grocery shopping, and have it delivered via Amazon, which made the whole online shopping process a lot easier. There's the picture on the top right with said "Speak Now." When I first came into contact with accessibility, I developed repeated stress injury a good 23 years ago. So one of the things I had to do at the time was still write my papers, and I dabbled a bit into voice recognition. After maybe 2 or 3 weeks of constantly trying to train the software to listen to my voice, and somewhat without failure try and dictate text to it while it not made any weird spelling mistakes or that did not work at all. Whereas these days, I can buy a 100-pound cell phone and there's a dictation option right there. I can send a WhatsApp, and I literally do this all the time. I just press a microphone, talk into the thing, and it pretty much flawlessly transposes my speech into text. Cell phones in general, like I said, very much come with accessibility features by default. Both Android and iOS are fantastic enablers for people with various impairments, whether that's the screen readers that they come with, or like the peripherals that you can attach to them to control it with a keyboard or similar devices. It's been a real game changer in terms of enabling people to use new technology. We're also, one of the examples we really like is the OXO potato peeler. It's one of those products that got developed and developed and developed, and it turned into a product that is now very much usable by everyone, but the origin of it sits in, okay, we have a potato peeler, and if you're having difficulty using your hands, it is currently not usable, so we want to make a better product. And we're also seeing a lot of digital inclusion happen, a lot of recognition of people with disabilities in things like emojis, and most recently also in Barbie, including the new film, by the way, having a lot of meaningful representation for people with disabilities and people of color. So we're making very good strides in that process. One of my personal passions is accessibility in gaming. It's, one of the reasons I developed repeated stress injury was because of excessive gaming. So that's not changed that much. I still try and get a game in every once in a while. But both Microsoft with the adaptive controller on the line, and then in the top middle, we can see a glimpse of the upcoming PlayStation accessibility controller as well. Microsoft having all kinds of assistive devices where there's a central hub and you can connect it. The blue parts are 3D printed, so you can basically create a 3D model, click it onto the joystick, and basically create whatever handle you need. And then on the bottom right, we're seeing a guy playing a video game. There's all kinds of controllers and switches attached to his body. He has a switch next to his head as well, so he can move left or right. But it enables him to join in on video games. One of the most remarkable, and I don't have a screenshot of this at hand currently, but one of the most remarkable things in gaming last year was that Microsoft released their latest version of Forza Motorsports, which is a hyper-realistic racing game. The remarkable thing is this comes with a mode wherein people that are completely visually impaired and have no vision are still able to play a racing game based on audio cues. It's an amazing step, an amazing progression, where it's also setting the benchmark and showing other developers like, yes, this can be done. So the future of accessibility then. We started with the gentleman in the wheelchair with a VR headset on his head, and that's making its return. We can see it again on the top right with a young kid. On the bottom left, we're seeing a representation of a virtual tour. Funny fact, I was creating those virtual tours as a side gig about 12 years ago. Using a camera, taking pictures, similar to what you would get with Street View, except in higher fidelity and with a custom interface that you could literally add information to. There's been a huge amount of progress in that space as well. As we can see on the top left, that's in the Dutch theme park, the Efteling, which they have an attraction called Dream Flight. It's, if you've been to Disneyland, it's a bit like the Small World ride, and where you have a cart that goes through various scenes. It looks gorgeous, but the carts themselves aren't accessible. So when we went there for my parents' wedding anniversary, and my mother is in a wheelchair, she's unable to walk, unfortunately, but she was able to go to this room, sit there with a VR headset on, and what they've done is they've made a 360-degree video recording of that ride, and you can sit there and just look around like you're in that space. So VR, from that sense, is definitely a new and upcoming, or not even upcoming, but it's more and more an enablement for people that physically cannot get to a space, or there's no physical way of making a certain attraction maybe accessible. To coming up with an alternative solution that is really immersive. If you're really, I want to say really old, you might remember Second Life, which was a big virtual world. Like a couple of years ago, we had the mention of the metaverse, which has a similar thought. But again, that's technology that enables people that might be physically constrained to their house to have be it digital, but have a social life with social interactions. And definitely expecting like accessibility to further enable that, combined with VR into a really meaningful experience. Some other aspects on the future. So what we're currently seeing, and I'll start on the right-hand side, we're seeing a cell phone, and it says Be My Eyes. Be My Eyes is an application that can be used by people with a visual impairment to basically ring anyone around the world. They can put in a request, I want something or someone to help me in this situation, and they can press a button. It connects you to one of the volunteers within the program, and like I would get an incoming request, and I can accept that. It makes a live video feed, and someone can just show me the video feed, and I can relay them to what's in their surrounding, what kind of product it is, or help them perceive the world in a meaningful way. With the current state of AI, we're also seeing image recognition integrated into those apps. Definitely not perfect, but again, a good step in the direction, because that would enable people to, again, do that even more self-sufficiently. They don't need to wait for someone to pick up that request, and sometimes nobody's available, and you're stuck. So that's where the AI image on the sensor comes in. If you know the reference, reach out to me after the talk, and we can shake hands because you're a fellow nerd. I'm not going to spoil it, by the way. And we have Lady Justia as the final one. And that's because we have the European Accessibility Act coming up. So in June 28, 2025, we'll get a new act within the EU market that sets functional requirements for accessibility in various key sectors. Those sectors have been identified being high importance or like already they already have a high variety of different regulations, and the Act is trying to condense it all into a single stream of regulations across the EU. That applies to you if you deliver products or services on the EU market, even if your HQ or your company is outside of the EU. So if you're in the UK and you're selling a product or having you're having an e-commerce website, and I live in the Netherlands, so if I'm able to shop at your UK store and have it delivered to my house, it needs to be accessible. Like I said, there's 7 key markets. The 3 with the biggest impact generally for there's things like public transportation, aviation sector as well, but the biggest impact areas will be banking services, and that includes anything from your banking app to renting a car because you're technically leasing something. So that has very wide range coverage. Ebooks, so digital publishing. There's various formats, of course, like EPUB being the current favorite in terms of allowing transposing physical books into digital ones in an accessible way. And then, like I said, there's e-commerce as a giant sector. We're purchasing more and more online, and we need to make sure that that happens in an accessible way. If you want to know more about the legal perspective of accessibility, I did a talk about 6 months ago. It's on YouTube, so if you go to bit.ly/A11Y, which is ALI, which is the abbreviation of accessibility laws, you can watch that recording or scan the QR code, and it'll get you there as well. And we'll make sure that the link is shared afterwards as well. Highly recommend it. It goes way more in depth into those new accessibility regulations. A bit of privacy concern I wanted to mention is like I said, accessibility is about enabling people to use your product. It's not about tailoring to a specific situation, but making your product modular enough that anyone can use it and make their own required adjustments. The Web Accessibility Guidelines very much tailored to that extent, and so should you in your design choices, for example. There's ethical choices to be made. Like, we often get the question, but can't we detect screen reader users and their usage? Technically, no, or in a very limited way, because the way the interaction works. But also, is that really ethical to single out certain types of disabilities and, again, starting to tailor to that field? Not really a good thing. Like, we all have right to our privacy. Privacy has never been more important, especially with the uprise of AI as well, and how a language model gathers their data. It's having that as a price of autonomy. Like, take Be My Eyes, for example. Depending on how they manage their data, if that is the only way for someone to be able to go outside and use a product or discover the world with their disability, and if they're then relying on that sole way of managing, like using AI to manage that situation, what is going on with their data? Because that's a very high price to pay, because they can never undo that. Like, there's also the risk of fraud, especially for people with a disability, because they have less options of trying to identify whether they're being frauded. Things like these days getting a call from a digitally generated voice that very much sounds like your kid, and them asking you to wire some money. It's things we're seeing more and more, and especially people with a disability are at a huge disadvantage in these situations. Again, accessibility is very much about people. It's about that social model of accessibility and allowing those people to use your product without being blocked in that journey. Right, then the future of accessibility needs you. Like I said at the start, I think when we're building and designing things, that's where accessibility should start. You should ensure accessibility is part of your workflow as soon as possible. If you're doing a market consultation, whether your product is viable, involve people with a disability all the way throughout. And that's where we need you. There we go. And in that sense, we often say accessibility is a team sport, hence the photo with the video or the soccer players there. So at every stage in the process, every role can play a crucial, or has a crucial role to play when it comes to the success of accessibility. And again, the end goal for all of us, we want to create a great product. We want to design and build things to the best of our abilities. And that's also why we need to include accessibility. It's about getting a better and more inclusive result. So how do you move that forward? So I can wrap up and give you some tangible stuff to do. It's a roadmap for your accessibility journey. Create one. It is a journey. It has a start point, and it will not be a short journey. It will take time. It might not even have an end, because technically there's always work to be done, and there's always new things built. One of the key things is to assess where you stand. So get to know where your current blockers are within a product, either by user research or by having an accessibility audit done. Get a baseline of, okay, these are the current problems we're facing. Then you can try and identify, okay, this is how we're going to solve them, but also this is how we're going to prevent them in the future. Raise awareness. So now that you're aware of accessibility, take it away, talk to others about it. One of the great ways you can do that is when you go back upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, we'll do a demonstration of our accessibility awareness sessions, which are a great tool to literally get some hands-on experience with what accessibility means for your product. So by all means, come join us during the breaks. Like I said, audit your platform, plan those remediation actions, like how do we fix it, how do we prevent it, and educate along the way and document your journey. Educating along the way means, okay, you don't have to know everything before you can get started, and you can learn along the way. The documentation part is really important. Like, things we quite often see is someone in an organization building knowledge and then finding out that, or like, they get to be the sole accessibility person within their company. They're just grinding their gears day in, day out, knocking on doors, trying to get it moving, and it's not happening. And then suddenly they decide, well, if you don't want to go, I'm gonna go. And they'll take all of that knowledge with them. If you work in wider teams, it just makes sense to create internal knowledge bases where people can just go and look up, all right, this is what we've already done, this is what we know, document things well and carefully. Overall, Mahatma Gandhi said it, be the change you wish to see in the world. Accessibility starts with you, starts with a single step. Move on to that journey, and we'd love to be your guide. Thank you.
Cool, thanks Ronny, that's amazing.
Welcome.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes, please. I also can't see the back still, so if anyone's got their hand up back there, I'm sorry.
Hi, great talk, thank you. So you said about planning remediation actions. I lead an accessibility task force, and we find that we've identified lots of issues, but they end up just languishing in a backlog, and we can't get product managers on board to actually fix them. And I wonder if you have any advice about how you get those actions actually through.
That can be tricky, and most of the time the problem there is some senior buy-in in terms of, like, apparently the priority isn't seen by the people that dictate how that backlog gets prioritized. So you're basically have more awareness work to do in that case. Not much else you can do at that point instead of just keep banging that drum.
Do you think the rise of AI decreases the need for accessibility because it will interpret the content for you anyway?
To some extent, yes. In terms of, like I said, supporting people with disabilities with things like image recognition, I think has a lot of potential. In terms of technically evaluating accessibility, we still have a very long way to go. In terms of when it comes to either automatically finding accessibility issues, that's difficult because there's a lot of interpretation into those. The working groups are definitely looking at a better and more central way of writing actable rules for accessibility checkers to adhere to. But a lot of it comes down to interpretation. I think we, as an accessibility team, on a weekly basis, have situations where someone comes to a point in an audit, like, do we fail this? Do we pass this? Like, what would be a sufficient recommendation? And that's like with most of us being in the field for 15, 20 plus years. So I think we still have a long way to go, but there's definitely room for AI. Not so much a fan of the current state when it comes to automatically trying to fix issues, because that, again, is a very nuanced area. But yeah, definitely potential.